Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Joey D'Antoni. You're in the Cloud Chronicles. This is Azure Networking Part 2. We're going to be talking about VPNs and ExpressRoute today. I'm Principal Cloud Architect at DesignMind, and I'm here with John Morehouse. Let John introduce himself.
Hi, I'm John Morehouse. I'm a principal consultant with D'Antoni and Associates. I'm also a data platform MVP, and we're here to talk about some really cool stuff about Azure networking. To tell you the truth,
Yeah, Azure.
like important stuff
This is important, and it's our second topic. Like we said, we're aiming for about 10 parts of this series because networking is complicated, y'all.
and big.
But
Yes.
the big one today, and the reason why we put this first is VPNs and ExpressRoute is really important. Almost every organization that starts their cloud journey, unless you're a startup, starts having some computers in an on-premises location, and then they want to add some computers in the cloud. It's very rare, and I would say not super common for organizations to have just the cloud presence. Like I said, unless you're a startup, but even then you might have an office or you might have remote employees, and you want to ensure that your network traffic is secure. And John, I'll let you kind of just at a high level explain what a VPN is outside of the context of Azure.
Outside the context. Okay, so it's probably
Yeah,
the
I
same
mean it's going to be the
inside the
same.
context of Azure, but a
Yeah,
VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. What a VPN does is allow secured and usually encrypted connectivity from basically one point to another. In the old school days, we would have a VPN connection from one data center to the other to allow secured and encrypted traffic from our primary data center to maybe our secondary or one of our remote offices. And usually that was a very complex thing to orchestrate when we were on premises. I think Azure actually makes it a little bit easier to get VPNs in place, quite a bit faster,
yeah.
for sure. But that's what that VPN does is allow secured traffic from point A to point B, basically.
I'm gonna like kind of correct your point A to point B though, because like traditional VPNs and Azure non-ExpressRoute VPNs may not go directly from point A to point B because they go over the public internet. They're secured and they're protected, but it's going over just a like so if I have a VPN from my house to your house in Philly to Virginia Beach, it's going to go you guys are on Comcast, right?
We're not Comcast. I don't know what we are. We're
Okay,
Verizon.
okay, even
We're
even
Verizon.
better, even better. So like I'm on Comcast, so it's gonna have to if I trace route from my house to yours, it's probably gonna have to switch providers at some point. That
Sure.
VPN is gonna go through all those connections. It
Yes,
is
but I mean, there's a source and a destination, and
correct, correct,
that
correct,
traffic is going to be encrypted,
correct.
whether whether it's Swiss private or not.
It's all secured.
Yep.
It just may not be the shortest path, and that's
Yeah, that's
because
fair.
that's going to
That's
be
fair.
kind of we're going to talk about express route versus site to site and point to site here. These are all solutions that effectively provide the same service at different levels and different quality levels. I think that's kind of the key thing you want to understand here because when we're talking about cost, the basic VPN, which I don't even think you can deploy in the portal anymore because I think Microsoft killed it. You can still deploy it over PowerShell. Costs like $30 a month, and it works. And like if you just want to secure traffic between, say, your office and Azure for a demo, where you don't need a lot of bandwidth, that's a great way to do it. ExpressRoute can cost up to several $100,000 a month, depending on the amount of bandwidth you need. In fact, there's higher tiers of ExpressRoute that go to like 100 gigabits per second, and they don't even publish the price for those. And like I've always learned, if you have to ask, you probably can't
Too
afford it.
expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's those kinds of services are really really pricey. So let's talk about in our last episode, I talked to John about like my history with Azure networking and how I built a cluster in 2013. And that was really early days of cloud. So everything initially was public. Azure SQL or SQL Azure. I know it's Azure SQL database now. It's SQL Azure then. 100% public. I think they might have added firewall rules at the beginning, but like it was pretty rudimentary in how that worked. But as soon as we got to VMs, really security became a bigger concern because once we got VMs, people started using the cloud for real stuff. And just to give you an example, when I built that cluster, The way I had the connection running was using was called, and still is called, a point to site VPN. And in the early days of Azure, this was ExpressRoute got introduced the year I was right after I did that presentation at Summit 2013, because I remember talking to a PM about it. But we had these point to site VPNs, which is an executable. It's kind of like if you've worked with a, I don't know, Cisco, pick your VPN vendor. If you've had to use a VPN to dial into your office, that's what a point-to-site VPN is. A site-to-site VPN is something that's going to be configured at your organization's edge router. John, do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, and I've always considered point to site, like, at least in my mind, like my laptop is the point, right?
Correct.
Whereas, as you mentioned, site to site would be the organizational router that's talking to the outside world. That would be, and then the other site would be Azure, right? And so site to site means that we're going to allow Azure to talk to our router, and therefore anything inside our network can talk to Azure securely through that connection. Whereas point is my laptop, and I have to configure it on my laptop.
And the big difference there, like from a security perspective, there's a concern. Although, like the point-to-site VPN now supports intra-ID auth and MFA, and with vWAN, it's virtual WAN. Sorry, it's actually pretty slick. I've been using it lately with a client, so it's way more secure than it used to be. But the performance is limited to what your laptop can do, and typically it's point-to-site is also. It's a process running on a computer as opposed to a network service that's running on an edge device, which admittedly an edge switch is just a computer, but typically those fancy edge switches have high availability built into them, and they're not going to suddenly fail unless it's at your one client whose network goes down all the time. But yeah, that's kind of the overview there. We're gonna do later in this talk is we're gonna walk through the process of starting a VPN. So one of the things we mentioned, there are 8,000 gateways. You need a gateway to have a VPN, whether that's ExpressRoute or point to site or point to site to site. By the way, site to site and point to site, same VPN configuration. You literally just check a box on your gateway to enable point to site, and there's some networking stuff that has to happen. But those are the kind of key things to keep in mind there. So we'll walk through that. But yeah, the scenarios of having a gateway, I think, John, are what you need to have a gateway to have a VPN. That's pretty much it.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a little bit about hub and spoke here? Because we mentioned the concept, and it's not the main point, but you can explain it a little bit.
Yeah. So a hub and spoke layout, and this, and you and I were talking about it earlier that. When you start to work with like VNets in the Azure networking space, and probably any cloud provider networking in general, but when we talk about Azure networking, we often will talk about hub and spoke, and it's really talking about the future planning of how you're going to lay out your network resources in a way that allows for growth and you can secure things. Joey and I both are pretty big on network segmentation, meaning splitting things off. And so if you talk about a hub and spoke, really what I always use is a wagon wheel. Right, and so you have a centralized hub where I typically will put like infrastructure things like VPNs, and then I will have a spoke for production, another spoke for development, maybe another spoke for, I don't know, R&D or test or some other purpose, and then those three spokes can all talk to the hub, but then I can lock it down so that they can't talk to each other. Right, so that's network segmentation. So that's what the hub and spoke concept is that we have a wagon wheel where we put centralized things like a VPN in that hub, and then we allow things to talk to it.
Yeah, I can give you another example because I built this architecture for a customer last year. They were a kind of a software as a service provider that ran on VMs, and in their hub we had things like the VPN connection, the firewall, the app gateway. And then each customer got a spoke network, and within that spoke network, they'd have like a SQL subnet, an app subnet, and the app gateway would map. And everything could talk. The hub could talk to all of the spokes, but each spoke couldn't talk to the other spokes. So yeah, just kind of a general design. The reason why we bring that up is there are certain Azure services that are always going to live in a hub, and there's some weird. When we start talking about network peering and stuff, there's going to be some weird messages around Do you want to peer this hub using the gateway traffic? And when you're peering to a hub, in that those messages are really kind of confusing, and we'll explain that later. But what that's saying is, since your VPN's in the hub, can that VPN gateway traffic traverse down to your spoke networks? Which, in most cases, you're going to want. You may not. It's going to depend on your traffic, but that's something to kind of keep in mind. Anything else there that you can think of?
No, I mean and again, I'm going to harp on the network segmentations, like the hub and spoke concept. Really understanding that is a key component of doing Azure networking. When it comes to the VPN, that should go in the hub. Yeah, like we had a client that we put their VPN, their gateway in the hub, and they didn't want access from one subnet to another spoke, and we were able to block that off because we did a hub and spoke design.
Yeah, the PowerShell for that's really weird too, by the way, because you have to run it. If a lot of these things, if you do in the portal, the portal will, because what happens when you do this stuff in Azure between networks, in the portal, it's actually making a change on both networks for you, and you don't realize it. But when you do it via PowerShell, you have to actually run the change on both sides. So peering's a good example of that. That routing traffic's a good example of that. So that's something to keep in mind.
Denny and I had to get on a call and walk through it. It took us 15 months because I needed Denny to help me work it all out in terms of what had to go where, which network security group had to be changed and whatnot.
Yeah, and the one thing I'm remembering, and I think this was peering, it might have been something else. When I did it in PowerShell and didn't do it on both sides, it didn't throw the message that it used to throw back when you had to do it on both sides in the portal. So it was what the hell's going on? And then I talked to Rob or somebody, and I think the way I ultimately figured it out was there was no, I don't want to say mathematical, but mathematical way that you couldn't put the right commands in the right order unless you ran it twice, parameters. Anyway, the next thing we want to talk about is ExpressRoute. And I know we've mentioned that ExpressRoute's not that fundamentally different from site-to-site VPN. There's some magic you can do with ExpressRoute, and it's going to cost you a lot, and it's got a lot more redundancy and all those things. You probably need, I don't know, what would be your decision matrix for when you need ExpressRoute, John?
Probably. Well, I think one of the biggest things I would probably look at is to see how much bandwidth I need in order to talk to Azure resources. What I have found is that most smaller organizations probably don't need an ExpressRoute because the price for the capacity you get probably isn't going to necessarily benefit you. But again, it goes back to you have to know your workloads. You have to know how much traffic you need to send and receive from Azure stuff to help to make that decision whether or not you need to invest in an ExpressRoute.
And a lot of organizations may lease an ExpressRoute for, especially if you're doing a cloud migration, you may lease it for a period of time. There's a few ways you can buy it. So if you're in a colo, your colo provider probably has especially if you have a big provider, they probably already have an ExpressRoute, a large-scale ExpressRoute connection to Azure, and you can lease some of that. You can have it come into your location, or you can, just connect directly to the Microsoft Edge. And I'm going to share an architectural diagram.
I always equated the ExpressRoute to the old school days of, you're moving into a new data center, you had to call somebody like a Quest or a service provider to actually physically come on site and enable that location access to the copper. You have to actually install something. And so that's what I always equated ExpressRoutes to. Is
so one of the things
that circuit.
And this is that's a good point. And that's why I kind of brought that up when you were talking about VPNs earlier. And I was like, VPNs go over the internet. ExpressRoute can be, depending on how you buy it, and in most cases it is, a dedicated connection from your network to an Azure region. So you're not going over all those hops. And you may connect through a partner at a different data center, but that's going to be your only hop. And then it's going to be a dedicated connection. I pulled this architectural diagram off Docs today. I think it's kind of interesting because I know the history of this diagram, and it hasn't been updated in 10 years. Because if you'll notice, it shows the old SQL Azure logo,
I
the
was just
logo for
I saw
document
that.
D, the logo for document DB, HD Insight. I don't remember what that bottom middle logo is, but I think it's just VMs. But it must be some managed VM solution. I think that's table storage at the top, and then the bottom right, like I say, I don't remember what that icon is. Anyway, the reason why that's all there is that was that this diagram, even though it's currently on Docs, is from when before Private Link existed. So, in order to get private connectivity to any of those services, you had to have ExpressRoute, and this is like probably 2015 to 2017. Also, you can get private connectivity to Office 365. So you, depending on your organization, you may use Office 365, and you're probably using it over the internet endpoints. That's Microsoft's official recommendation. The only time I think they recommend using ExpressRoute for 365 is if you have a large number of Skype voice users, or not Skype, sorry, Teams voice users, because all that VoIP traffic can consume a lot of bandwidth. The reason, and you have to even get
That
approval
makes sense.
for this, because what funny story here that somebody at Microsoft told me at one point, then I mean, probably is an NDA, but probably bad behavior, and I don't even know how true it is. There was a sales rep in Australia who was a little bit unscrupulous. I know that's shocking that a sales rep could be unscrupulous.
No, you don't say.
But they were like every Office 365 deal they did, they were bundling ExpressRoute into it.
Oh, oh my.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like so, like you'd go to like mom and pop shops to sell them, 20 Office 365 seats, and then they'd be like, "Yeah, and by the way, you need to buy the secure networking solution that cost $11 billion."
11 billion Z. Yep, that's accurate. Can be.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk to some of the redundancy features that ExpressRoute does have?
So I know that they got redundancy built in, right? So you have to go
Yeah.
buy that circuit from a provider of some nature, and so we get that secured and direct connection to the Microsoft Edge routers, right? And there are two connections between the two, so you do have a redundant connection baked into that product. I don't think you don't pay for that, right? That's bundled into the
The
price.
redundancy at a single region level is built in.
Yeah, so we don't
Yeah.
you don't pay extra for
Yeah.
that redundant, which is nice, right? Because most providers like to take your money, so having redundancy baked in is a good thing to have, for sure.
However,
That's the only redundancy I'm aware of.
yeah, the other thing you can do, and this does cost extra, it's part of, I can't remember if the feature is called ExpressRoute Global Reach or if it's part of the ExpressRoute Plus package. You can peer your connections across cloud regions, and so like this example, you see US West and UK South. This customer bought the fancy package. Like I say, I don't remember off the top of my head if Global Reach, and I'll put it in the show notes. Global Reach is a additional service, but I think it's part of like, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it ExpressRoute Enterprise Edition, where you buy the additional services, and it will share all of the service. So you're just getting a low latency, high speed connection between your edge and an Azure region, but with Global Reach, it can go beyond. And there are a couple of key differences here between VPN and ExpressRoute. The big one is speed. You're limited by the speed
Yeah,
of your internet connection and the congestion there. With ExpressRoute, you're going to have dedicated bandwidth. You're going to pay for it, but you're going to have consistent high performance. You want to talk through some scenarios where you need that dedicated bandwidth for a DR, or
yeah,
not even a DR, but just like a
yeah.
cloud
I actually
migration scenario?
actually just last week, a client of mine actually they had an express route to Azure, and they have a very highly transactional system and volatile, meaning not dangerously volatile, but they're churning data at a very high rate. And turns out that they had something misconfigured in the network, and they were sending backups over the public internet and not that express route. And so, and they have many, we're talking thousands of databases, and the sending of the backups to blob storage, which is a great practice. Like I love that notion of getting backups off the on-premises data center, was making congestion for the outbound traffic and inbound traffic for other things like their clients. And so having the bandwidth, they actually found the issue and they shifted it. They were able to utilize the dedicated bandwidth of the ExpressRoute and help mitigate the problem that they were having.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. Like they send all their SQL backups through that ExpressRoute, and then have another pipe for other things.
And the other thing with ExpressRoute, I think that's a big difference in that space, is you have a little bit more granularity over doing QoS on that line, as opposed to the VPN, where you may or may not, depending on your network switch, you may not have as much. One of the things you'll hear hyped a lot is security. I think it's kind of BS. It's more availability, right? Like you have an encrypted connection that's encrypted on both ends. Your ISP can't read that. It's a VPN connection with a standard VPN. But with ExpressRoute, you're not even going over their hardware. So that's the big difference there. I think the other big difference here is just cost. ExpressRoute
for sure.
Really expensive. Like your minimum cost for ExpressRoute is going to be, by the time you're done paying anyone just to get like the basic ExpressRoute in place, is going to be a couple of $1,000s a month, and that's like
you pay much more.
Yeah, you can pay like hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. Maybe not surprising for large enterprises that have complex architectures.
And I looked it up. The basic VPN is, you were right, it's like $27 a month.
Yeah.
For a limited bandwidth, right? It's 100 megabits per second.
For the one you'd want that's like highly available, it's going to be like $100 a month for the VPN connection, because like I mentioned, the basics aren't there anymore. But that's actually a good segue into our network. So in the last episode, we built a demo VNet. And what I didn't do is name it Hub. So I've created another VNet in preparation for this, and this one's called Hub. Our Hub VNet. We're still using Azure DNS, and what we're going to do though is build a network gateway here. And I thought I could do that from here, but I think I need to go out to the resource group and then say, let's build a VPN gateway.
Gateway.
Yeah.
Everybody gets a gateway.
Everybody gets a gateway because there are 200 different gateways. So the one we want here is a virtual network for site-to-site VPN. And we're not actually going to finish building it. I'm going to build it, and we'll have it for the next episode. But VNet Gateway, Hub, East US.
Look, you have to have a gateway for an ExpressRoute and a VPN.
Yeah, basically the gateway is just for that's a good point. The gateway is for ExpressRoute costs more, and it has higher availability. You'll notice here you can select these various types of gateways. They all scale to bandwidth and cost. If I recall, the higher the number, the higher the cost. And you'll see the ones with AZ that are highly available across AZs. Because this is my connection, I'm not going to use an AZ one. If you're doing this in real life, I would recommend doing an AZ one because you want that higher availability. And we're going to.
I think we talked about what AZs are in an earlier session about availability zones. FYI, that's what AZ stands for.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Wait, how do I have a gateway? The joys of doing live demos.
The virtual network already has a gateway of this type. And this is a very common Azure networking.
Yeah, you're going to see live troubleshooting. We're going to look at our topology to make sure.
This is also one of those handy things, like Joey mentioned in the other session about the tools. Visually seeing the topology of the virtual network can be handy, especially when you get to more complicated deployments.
Yeah, for sure. Let's look at the address space. We don't have anything.
Do you have any other gateways?
Oh, you know what? It's my peering settings, I bet. Yeah, it's the receive forwarded traffic. Or no, not receive forwarded traffic. So these were those gateway settings we were talking about earlier. Let me just double check on the other peered network because I bet it's something there that's affecting. In this, not our hub, we want our other network. Demo, peerings.
I think you enable one of the gateways. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh, I didn't like that
uh,
either.
no, because I don't have any gateways yet. Fun stuff. I'm going to kill this demo for lack of a better story right now. We'll get this built and it'll be in place by the next time we're ready. But you can see some of the challenges we have, even as experienced professionals, because I didn't do a pre-recorded demo because those are lame. And we ran into some errors. I thought there was a way you could like add a gateway from here, but I guess not.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, let's just try that one more time. Do you have to create? So one of the things you have to do is create a subnet for the gateway. I don't think that has to get created ahead of time.
Yeah, give it a name. Yep.
VNet.
Generation 2. And what VNet did you choose? I assume you chose the
Yeah, the hub one.
virtual network already has a gateway of this type, or the existing gateway in the virtual network does not support coexistence.
Assistance.
But so,
Let's just
so
delete
it
our.
thinks that there's a gateway somewhere else.
I'm going to delete our peering just because I don't want to.
I don't know why the pairing would cause that issue, but
I don't either.
and quite often, as Joey does this, if you have other people that are experienced with Azure networking, get them on the phone.
Yeah.
Because half the time when I have issues, I call Joey and say, "Hey, walk me through this because I'm missing something." And half the time he will be like, "Oh yeah, you're missing this checkbox because it's another set
Also,
of eyes."
Google the error or
That too. That too.
yeah. Okay, so our peering's gone. So we just have a vanilla network. I don't know why this would be failing then. I don't know why it would have been failing before.
I don't know why it's failing before if there's no gateway there.
Oh.
Nope.
We may have found a bug or something. Stay tuned. We'll come back next week and we will have a VPN gateway in place. I promise.
We could do a short segment video on
to fix this.
We've undone this one.
Yeah.
We fixed this one.
Yeah, we'll probably do an addendum, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Cool.
Live demos in action.
Live demos in action. No recorded demos here. All right. Well, I think that's about it. You have the concept of a VPN. The most important thing I want you to leave this with is as soon as you start to get an Azure presence, build a VPN. Like get that hub network in place, get a site-to-site or a point-to-site in place, because you don't want to. The alternative is you're opening public ports on VMs and stuff, and that's just gross and terrible. So you don't want to do that.
But even before you do that, please spend 5 minutes, think about how you want to lay things out, your address spacing, right? And then do the VNets and like what Joey said, put the VPN gateway in there.
And just remember, you don't need ExpressRoute for Office 365.
Yes, you don't need ExpressRoute for Office 365.
My understanding is because of that story, there's like an extensive check process you have to go through to get ExpressRoute turned on for Office 365. So, cool. Well, thanks. Like and subscribe, and you got to see some fun, some networking fails. And join us for session 3 and the rest of the sessions in this networking and Azure Cloud Chronicles solution. Like and subscribe. Thanks.
Happy networking. Bye. Talk to you later.
Hi, and welcome back to the Cloud Chronicles. I'm Joey. This is John. And we're all set up for our next jobs writing error messages for the Azure portal. So when we left you, I was struggling to create a VPN. John, what was I missing?
You are missing a gateway subnet.
which we mentioned, right?
We did mention that, and we were getting horrible error messages for it.
Yeah, so it turns out when you create a VM on an existing network, or a VPN on an existing network, rather, Azure will not create the gateway subnet for you. So you have to create your own gateway subnet. It's right there. It's nothing special. It has to be called gateway subnet, and it has to be at least a /27. But as you saw earlier in this video, if you're watching carefully, it's an option to create when you're deploying your VPN or when you're editing your VNet to add that subnet. Here I'm recreating my VPN. You'll note, if you remember, John, this process used to take like 60 to 90 minutes. It took approximately 20 when I built this time. We edited it down so you don't have to watch all 20 minutes of it. And as I struggle to name this, a couple of things.
Naming's hard.
We associate it with our hub VNet. We have to create, I made this highly available, which means we have to create a couple of public IP addresses to be associated with it. So here, I'm just going to call this PIP, I think East US. Naming things is hard, but
Especially in Azure.
especially in Azure. Maybe I didn't add the region, I probably should have. But the whole reason why we really recorded this video is because of terrible networking error messages, which we're going to get to in a second, because it gets worse from here. And I probably should have included the region in my IP address name there. Always a good practice. You should also probably tag things. Don't do as
Yep.
don't do as I do. Do as I say. So
Tag
here,
is
submit the deployment. We're going to fast forward through this. This, like I mentioned, takes about 20 minutes. John, have you configured point-to-site VPN and authentication recently?
Actually, we have. Well, when I say recently, probably within the last year, we've had to set up point to site and done the authentication piece.
Yeah, one of the cool things you can do now is use IntraAuth to authenticate to Azure's point-to-site VPN client.
Which is cool.
Which is cool, because I thought that would be a really nice thing to do and a good way to configure this. So as we watch this deployment take place, and I promise you this is taking place at like 20x speed, because this whole video is only 8 minutes and we're about halfway through it. I can just kind of zip through. Okay, there we now have a virtual network gateway. Yay! Okay, so what we're going to do here, we see we have a route-based VPN, we have a public IP address. I want to configure point-to-site VPN, so I'm going to click Configure Now, and this seems easy enough. One random thing that is also weird about this address pool has to be non-contiguous IP address space, which I suddenly remember at some point when I'm typing this IP address incorrectly. So I think we chose 10 something for our network. I go to choose 10.100 here, and I think it says I'm overlapping, and I was going to do a /28, which is, I think, 256 addresses. It's ultimately going to bark at me about that. By the way, you'll note they haven't updated from Azure Active Directory to Entra. We also have to create a new public IP address for this user VPN connection. Now we get to the really fun part. So you're going to see me in this video go to docs a whole bunch of times. Because each of these things we fill in have different requirements around trailing slashes.
Because we can't have nice things.
Because we can't have nice things. And they're not validated in the browser. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is grab my tenant ID, which you can grab here. The faster way to do this is just to log into PowerShell. If you log into PowerShell, you'll get prompted with Connect Azure AZ account.
See that the audience, knowing that the audience is the tenant ID is...
I think they mentioned that earlier. I think that was there when it was blank. Okay, it barked at me about something. Oh, yeah, this is the error message. So I'm getting this error message. I think I grabbed the wrong tenant ID or something. Or maybe I grabbed subscription ID. But I just get deployment validation failed. I get nothing here. You can use Copilot to help you troubleshoot. I'll be completely honest with everyone. We're MVPs. We generally say nice things about Microsoft. Copilot in Azure has never done anything usable for me at all.
Yeah, same.
I use GitHub Copilot every day as I'm writing code, and it's really useful. But Copilot in Azure is, I don't want to say it's completely useless, but it hasn't helped me at all. So I'm like, let's go to docs, because surely. And if you read carefully here, It takes me a minute to find the right, because I'm on the Microsoft registered app. And I scroll down, and then I find this awesome thing where that has to be my audience. I grab the wrong one, or the wrong GUID. Because why do you even have a GUID here? Shouldn't that just be a pull down that says this is for Microsoft Azure? You have the same terrible
validation code.
Yeah, same terrible error message. So I'm going to go back to docs and we're going to look at that again. And this is not something we do all the time, so hence why we're making a lot of mistakes. But this is also kind of ridiculous because I scroll down and what you're going to see here is that we have these requirements for what we have to do. So we need non-contiguous IP space. I remember that. I'm going to go back and change that now. The IP address space for your point-to-site network is not in your address space for your virtual networks. It's really weird and doesn't make sense to me. But it is what it is. So just always remember that's going to come out of separate IP address space, even though it's going to be connected to the network. So ideally, you want to make it something completely different. That's what I did by going 172.16 there. Then I look at this again, and man, this was... I'm like, surely I have this right. And then I'm going to zoom in the video here because they make a key point about these trailing slashes. And what kills me is like, the portal's just JavaScript, right? And we go blank. The portal's just JavaScript. They could validate all of this stuff in the browser and raise an error in the browser before you submit anything to Azure here. And now I'm like, what the hell? And I think I missed the trailing slash on the first one, which requires a trailing slash, or maybe the last one. One of these requires a trailing slash. The other one does not. Just to be super consistent. Yeah, it's the last one has a trailing slash. The first one does not. But you can use a forward slash. So basically, we're kind of ranting here because all of this should really be handled in the Azure portal. Or just fixed posts, because substring and append are things in code. So we get this finally working, and I'm happy. And I send like 5 ranty text messages to John about how that Azure Networking error messages got. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's par for course.
Yeah. So if you're a developer and you're watching this, write good error messages.
Yeah.
And parse text in your browser. Don't send it to the service before you do that.
Yeah.
That was not a good time.
Okay. My rant would be if you can't do it in the browser, at least give us useful and actionable error messages. I think that's more important than I think the fix, yes, I agree, is the fix the browser to sanitize that. Or at least check it.
And so let's just talk about a couple of these things. So audience is pretty much a static value based on which cloud you're in. Like if you're in GovCloud or you're in regular Azure or you're in China. So that should be static. It should at least be a pull down that defaults.
Yeah, I agree. Pull that down from a drop down.
Your tenant ID is a default. That should also be a default. Like the only thing here, and I think likewise the issuer is just your tenant ID again. So all these are pretty much static values and could probably be at least pre-populated. Yeah. So do a better job, Azure Networking Portal team.
Yeah, please.
With that, we'll wrap this episode, and thanks for your time.
Thanks. We'll see you in the next one. Good error messages.